What about the psychic side of things? What about the development of Soviet psychic research? Well, for that, we go back to the 1920s, which was really the first decade of the Bolshevik, the first decade after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1919 in Russia. So Gleb Boki was the chief cryptographer of the Bolshevik secret police, and he began a program studying the occult, prophecy, ancient science, and psychic abilities related to legends of Shambhala. So here you had a very prominent Bolshevik political figure involved in the security services that understood that research of these advanced aerospace technologies needed to be complemented by understanding this kind of history of psychic research, or the significance of psychic and occult abilities in terms of understanding or using any ancient technologies. So he organized expeditions with Soviet funding to find entrances to the inner earth that had been discussed. And so he traveled to the Altai Mountains. I already mentioned that. That's relatively close to Novosibirsk. And he organized expeditions to find the Shambhala in the Siberian region, in the Altai Mountains, areas of Mongolia. And he was quite serious. He believed that there were the ruins or entrances to ancient civilizations, and that whatever civilizations existed there, they could be contacted and they could be persuaded to share some of their advanced technologies with the Earth. And also another element here is, of course, that the Soviet Union recovered spacecraft from inner Earth civilization. So this gives us an idea of why Gleb Boki was determined to find the entrances to these craft. So this is all preceded these crash retrieval operations in the 1940s, but nevertheless, it gives us an idea that already there were people in the Soviet Union that understood the importance of occult research and psychic phenomena. There was a famous book by a US researcher that really kicked off psychic research in the United States. So her book that came out in 1971 was actually Sheila Ostrander and Lynn Schroeder. They wrote this book, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, and they talked about what they had found about the Soviets successfully harnessing psychic energy for telepathy, remote viewing, remote influencing, telekinesis, etc. So that sparked the Pentagon and the CIA's efforts to understand remote viewing. So it began in 1975. As I recall, the first remote viewing program was called Grill Flame, involved the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA, and it went through a number of different names. And the final name, before it was all declassified in 1995, was Stargate. And so that's when the psychic program was declassified and made known to the world. And it's very interesting they chose that name in 1995. Now, what's the relevance of psychic research for the Soviet space program? I think there was an interview I did with Miriam Delicado, and she shared, I think, really important information about a Soviet psychic program that had been taken over by the Russian Federation after 1991, and that this program was very active and very kind of influential and had some very talented psychics. So let me play a video extract of the interview I did with Miriam. You can find it on exopolitics.org, and it goes for about an hour and a half. But here's an extract that goes for about 3 minutes, so I'm going to play that for you now.
So when my father was young, he often talked about his psychic ability, at least he did with me. And he drilled something into my mind when I was young. And he kept saying that when he was on the streets of Paris during the war, the Second World War, and he was very young, when he was on the streets of Paris, that he was approached by what he called the Russian psychic army. And he said, if they ever come to you, if they ever come, never go with them, no matter what they say. He said, those people will never let you go. He said, if you go with them, you can never leave. There's nowhere to hide, because wherever you go, they can get a group of them together and they just have to use their minds and they'll kill you. So don't ever go with them. So I thought he was crazy, right? I'm thinking he's nuts. And he was crazy to a degree, but also the most brilliant man I've ever known. So at 22, very shortly after I had this experience with the direct contact, I was working in a yogurt shop that had glass as the wall to the outside street. And this man walked past and made direct eye contact with me and then walked right in, didn't even look at me or say anything other than walked straight up to the counter and with the straightest face walked up to me and said, do you work for the CIA or the FBI? And he said, I started laughing. I said, no. He said, have you ever worked for the CIA or the FBI? I said, no. And then he said, have you ever thought about working with the Russians? I said, what are you talking about? He said, we work with people like you, people who are gifted, people who are very psychic. And he was talking about this. And all of a sudden I realized, this is what my father told me. And I was in my mind, I'm going to tell you, in my mind, I was freaking out. Like I'm 22, 23 years old, and I have this man trying to recruit me to go and work with the Russians. He told me, he said, we work with people like you. And I said, I'm not interested. He said, but he said, you're very, very powerful. And I said, yes. And he said, but can you control it? And I said, yes. He said, if you come with us, you will be in a community of approximately 10,000 people. He said, we've created a community that's filled with people like you. He said, you'll be with your own kind. He said, and you'll always be supported. He said, we'll teach you and train you. He said, you'll be very, very powerful. And I said, I'm not interested.
So there you have Miriam Delicado telling us about her personal experiences with this Russian psychic program and how powerful it is and how well organized it is, and that you have a community of 10,000 trained psychics that are very well trained and can do remarkable things. So something to keep in mind in terms of how the Soviets have been using, or the Russians today use psychics for their secret space programs. So I'll give you a little bit more information about that. So the Psi-Corps, that's what we can call them, this psychic corps of 10,000, they assist with secret space programs, deep underground military bases, and alien relations. And that operates worldwide to recruit gifted psychics like Miriam Delicado. Of course, once you say yes, then you're trapped for life. So she was warned and didn't do it. But and apparently she suffered no bad consequences for saying no. But I think if you say yes, then that's it. You're locked in. So it's a lifelong, recruitment is a lifelong commitment. So this idea of a Psi-Corps involved with space programs, involved with dealing with advanced extraterrestrials, is something that I think was disclosed in a television series called Babylon 5. So in this television series, you had a Psi-Corps, and it was very well equipped and very powerful, and its main function seemed to be assisting in identifying who was telling the truth, who was lying, that the psychics could identify when people would deviate from truth. It was also involved in espionage and also had a war application. And in this series, gifted psychics were forced to join the Psi-Corps or their abilities were suppressed by pharmaceutical products that they were compelled to take on a daily basis if they didn't join the Psi-Corps. So a very interesting soft disclosure initiative. And I think this is a way in which we in the general public are often given information that helps us prepare for the time when official disclosure happens. So if you wanted to watch a short history of Babylon 5, the Psi-Corps, then that's the website. I have the link at the bottom there for you to follow. So Anton Anfilov, I asked him about the existence of a Psi-Corps as Miriam Delicata described it, and he had some more interesting information to share about this Psi-Corps in terms of how it was involved in the Russian secret space program. So let me play you now a clip from this interview I did with Anton Anfilov that came out just this week. So, and in it, he talks about Nazi Germany using this global network of tunnels. So everyone is using these global network of tunnels. The Russians are using it, the Americans are using it, the Nazis used it, British, Australians are using it, so everyone's using it. And he's saying that the use of psychics was standard operating procedure. So just as the Germans used psychics, the Vril program and the Nazi SS, and so he elaborates more about this. So let me play this video clip for you. How significant, how important are psychics to the understanding, the development and reverse engineering of these advanced flying saucer technologies?
Yes, sure. I know that psychics are used long ago in Russia and in Soviet Union. They were also used starting from late 20s when the special laboratory was created inside NKVD system, the predecessor of the KGB. It was called NKVD, and this laboratory was under the leadership of Gleb Boki, the famous guy in the Soviet Union during even Stalin's times. And later it was organized. He was killed by official order by the court and during the repressions in Stalin's time. And later it was World War II, big mess, and a lot of psychics were used, a lot of them, like Wolf Messing in the Soviet Union. He was very famous, and he consulted even party bosses of the Soviet Union, and talk started even, he even consulted Joseph Stalin at those times. And evidently that's true, I believe so. And I know the fact that several psychics, remote viewers, were taken to Zhukovsky Air Base already in the years after 2000. During this 21st century, they took these guys to this underground hangar, to this underground lab in Zhukovsky, southeast of Moscow, and they showed them these two objects, UFOs. They kept there, recently recovered in the year 2000, and they told them, guys, look, what can we do with them, what you see inside, how they are made, what is the importance, and so on and so forth. They had the whole list of questions to these psychics to help them to master this technology and to reveal what is that and how they can use these recovered vehicles, UFOs, I mean, crashed, recovered, and kept in Zhukovsky Air Base underground, southeast of Moscow. It's very nearby to Moscow, and then they moved them to Chelyabinsk region, to this nuclear center under the ground, the main Soviet repository, Russian repository today of the crashed, recovered UFOs. and also other locations also used for that purpose. So that's standard practice to use psychics and their mental abilities.
So there you have Anton Amphilov confirming that psychics are a very important part of the Russian secret space program, and that in fact they are standard operating procedure in that. Now, he mentioned one of these psychics that were part of the Soviet program was a famous Polish psychic used by the Soviet Union to understand crashed UFOs and extraterrestrial life. So you can imagine the scenario. The Russians recover a crashed UFO. What is this? What is the life form in here? Let's get a psychic. And so that's what happened. And so that was the beginning of the Russian program to develop a Psi-Corps that could help them deal with UFOs, alien life, and so forth. Now, Joseph Stalin used Wolf Messing, and also other senior Soviet leaders used him. Excuse me, and he was that talented, and he was that influential at the time. Now, Russia had a secret astronaut corps, and this was a secret group of KGB cosmonauts that were trained for space missions dating back to Yuri Gagarin in 1961. So just as the United States had the NASA space program training astronauts, and the Air Force and the NRO trained their own cadre of military astronauts that was a secret, the Soviet Union was doing the same thing. So this was not publicly revealed. And these pilots or these cosmonauts were considered expendable. They were KGB operatives or cosmonauts. So this relates to a series of secret Soviet moon missions. They were called Lunokhod missions that were publicly declared to be unmanned lunar landing probes, but in fact they had these military cosmonauts on them, and there were about a dozen one-way missions according to an ex-KGB operative. So yeah, Russia had, or the Soviets had, their own secret KGB cosmonaut cadre. So this is where we get into a very interesting and controversial topic, which is the existence of these so-called Soviet cosmospheres. So did these exist, or do they exist even today? According to Dr. Peter Beta, a former general counsel of the Export-Import Bank under the Kennedy administration in the 1960s, he claimed that the Soviet Union deployed cosmospheres in the 1970s, and that the Soviets had developed directed energy weapons and used those directed energy weapons that were on these cosmospheres to destroy a secret US military moon base. Quite controversial. It was called Battle of Harvest Moon, according to Beta. And in one of his audio letters, he said concerning the Soviet cosmospheres destroying a secret NSA moon base in 1977, he said, quote, "Diego Garcia, my friends, is the new spaceport from which secret missions to the moon have been launched during the building of the moon base." So he was saying that Diego Garcia was used for ferrying supplies and equipment and personnel to this secret moon base, which is quite credible, and that it was built, but then it was destroyed by the Soviets. He went on to describe exactly what happened. The Soviet Union began bombarding the moon base with a neutron particle beam on September 27, 1977. And by that evening, as Americans looked up at the harvest moon, the last few Americans on the moon were dying of neutron radiation. America had lost the Battle of Harvest Moon. Okay, so is this something that really happened? It is a very controversial thing. Peter Beta's letters, I think, were releasing genuine information, but sometimes genuine information is surrounded by a a litany of lies. I mean, I think it was Churchill that said that in times of war, truth is so precious that she needs to be protected by a litany of lies. So similarly, in this time of, was in a so-called time of peace, but really behind the scenes, war continues. There's a lot of disinformation. Now, there is a leaked State Department document that WikiLeaks put out that described a State Department official being interested in this story about a secret US moon base being destroyed by Russian cosmospheres. So it wasn't just Peter Beda's imagination or disinformation. There were people in the State Department, maybe they were fooled by this, or maybe they thought that there was some truth here, or they were simply out of the loop. So there were State Department officials that were interested in these claims of a secret US moon base destroyed by USSR. So there's the evidence that there was official interest in what Peter Beda had revealed back in 1977. So does this document really just suggest that the State Department officials at the time that made this inquiry were relatively junior officials and they were simply out of the loop? Very possible, because this was a very low classified. I think it was unclassified, but nevertheless, it shows that this was information that had aroused the curiosity of public officials. Now we get to modern day Russia and what kind of weapons they have. I mean, these so-called directed energy weapons stationed aboard cosmospheres or Russia's secret space program. How prevalent are they? I mean, how much do we know about them? Well, there's an article in the Debrief titled "The Strange Tale of Russia's UFO Wonder Weapons Based on New Physical Principles." So this is authored by Tim McMullen back in December of 2022, I think it is. So I read that correctly. So what is written in this article was in 2012, President Putin declared that Russia's long-term military goals included, quote, the creation of weapons based on new physical principles, beam, okay, so directed energy weapons, beam weapons, geophysical, well, we're talking about scalar weapons there, producing earthquakes, seismic activity, weather modification, wave, we're probably talking about some kind of electromagnetic frequencies that could be used for warfare against foreign populations. Genetic, well, all sorts of genetic experiments that have been happening, genetic weapons. And psychophysical, that's a very interesting one. Psychophysical, I think that's alluding to psychic weapons for the long-term military. So here there's an allusion, I think, to Russia's Psi-Corps. So psychophysical, telekinesis, Psi-Corps, I think that's probably a major part of this effort to militarize or to equip Russia for long-term military preparedness against future threats. So, as I've already mentioned, there was cooperation between Russia and the US and the United Kingdom in reverse engineering crash UFOs. I talked about Leslie Stevens. And Anton Anfilov confirmed this, that this cooperation was ongoing, even during the Cold War. Sometimes crashes did happen in Russia and teams from Britain or the US took part. They were involved in these activities and recovery operations. It wasn't that simple, but after the year 2000, all of this stopped and Russia took control, and actually now they have now a Russian secret space program. So I think what Anfilov is pointing to here is that progress on a Soviet secret space program was relatively slow. It wasn't nearly as advanced as the US program, and that because the Soviet Union and post-Soviet Russia, especially up until the year 2000, technologically was behind the US, they were relatively, well, they were content to allow the US to take the lead and build whatever spacecraft, and that the Russians would get something of that off the back end. But that after 2000, President Putin stopped all of that, and Russia began developing in earnest its own secret space program. So this takes me to the question of, well, how does a country go through the process of developing a secret space program? Well, it seems that countries that do this typically have a lot of expertise in building submarines. They have vast submarine fleets. Certainly the Nazis had a vast submarine fleet, and that they used some of those for ferrying supplies to Antarctica, Greenland, and so forth, where they would build their bases. Now, by the time of nuclear propulsion systems were developed in the 1950s for submarines, there was new energy sources that were developed, classified energy sources, where you could retrofit a submarine so it could become a spacecraft. Because the design of a submarine is not only something that is very compatible with underwater travel and depth, it can also be used in space. So if you replace the propeller shaft and the energy supply with some of the classified technologies that were developed for secret space programs, then a nuclear-powered submarine can be fairly easily retrofitted to become a dual-purpose submarine and spacecraft. So William Tompkins says that Nazi Germany used some of these submarines for developing some of its first cigar-shaped craft, using submarine designs that had been retrofitted with exotic power systems, or even nuclear power systems, nuclear fusion power systems. Now, in the case of the United States, the USS Nautilus, according to Tompkins, was retrofitted in the late 1970s. So after it was performed its service, by the 1970s, the USS Nautilus was, I guess, decommissioned. I don't know the exact date where it was decommissioned, but it was actually retrofitted. An anti-gravity engine or device was put in there. The nuclear fission power system was replaced by a nuclear fusion power system able to generate sufficient energy so that that anti-gravity technology that was put in there could levitate that craft into space. So now we get to the Soviet-Russian submarine fleet, which is also nuclear powered. So the Soviets and the Russian Federation have a history of building very large, very powerful nuclear powered submarines that could be easily retrofitted for a secret space program. So yeah, the USSR had a large submarine fleet, and that they also retrofitted submarines for space travel. So that was something that Anton Anvilov confirmed, as I recall. Now, Russia's secret space program and the Solar Warden program, well, what's the connection between those two? Well, we know from the disclosures of Gary McKinnon, where he talked about fleet-to-fleet transfers and non-terrestrial officers, and he saw a cigar-shaped craft, that he was describing these cigar-shaped ships or craft, anti-gravity craft, that were part of a US Navy secret space program. And Russia possesses a similar, even though a smaller space fleet than the Navy's Solar Warden program. So the existence of a Russian secret space program that is technologically sophisticated, but not as sophisticated and not as large as the US space program, is something that Anton Anvilov has corroborated in his interviews, and based on his extensive interviews with hundreds of Russian and Soviet insiders and his scrutiny of documents and so forth. Now, this is something that actually has been, I think, revealed in a soft disclosure format. So there was a soft disclosure of a Russian secret space program in the Stargate SG-1 program. So Stargate SG-1, for those that aren't familiar with it, it was sponsored by US Space Command. 2 US Air Force Chiefs of Staff played cameo roles. So it was something that had the support of Space Command and the US Air Force, and the producers were given access to Cheyenne Mountain and other Air Force facilities for production. Now, one of the elements of this show that ran for 10 seasons, and there's a lot of soft disclosure in there, was that it described the existence of a Russian secret space program. It described these Russian teams, and it described how Russia had its own Stargate program, smaller, not as sophisticated as the US program, but nevertheless, it was capable. And so it used that for some time, and then when it ran into trouble, it chose to share everything with the United States and got compensation in terms of information and some technology that was used for building its own advanced space technologies. And so Russia got through this arrangement in the Stargate program its own intergalactic battle cruiser called the Korolevs. And I mentioned earlier Sergei Korolev, the father of Russia's space program, conventional space program. So here the first Russian battle cruiser or mothership was the Korolev. So I think that is soft disclosure. Now, let's get into some of the kind of other sources that describe the kind of weapons capabilities of the Russian secret space program and what that relates to today. So is Russia using weapons developed with extraterrestrial help in the Syrian civil war? So veterans today has been around for, is an internet news blog that claims to have access to a lot of information from military veterans who are knowledgeable about some of these classified programs. And one of those veterans claims that Russia was given advanced weapons technologies by extraterrestrials to help it oppose deep state efforts to initiate wars in the Middle East countries such as Syria. So that is a very important point. Earlier on, I mentioned the deep state and how it was wanting to collaborate with the Antarctic Germans and how there was collaboration between the US Navy and the Soviet Union to collaborate, while on the surface you had this kind of Cold War that was largely orchestrated by the deep state. So you had a kind of tug of war in a way. You had once the deep state trying to manufacture war, more conflict, whereas the kind of this Earth Alliance wanted to cooperate and collaborate and share information. So here you have, I think, very important insights into this idea that the Russians were being helped by extraterrestrials to develop to develop weapon systems that they could intervene and prevent the destruction of a prominent Middle East country called Syria. Now, why would that have been important? Well, the reason is that there was a plan. There was a plan that was revealed by General Wesley Clark in 2001. I think it was 10 days after the 9/11 attack. And he described that there were 7 Middle East countries that included Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran that were targets for US wars over the next 5 years. And I believe that that process of targeting, removing the strong dictator leaders of these countries was really designed to create chaos, which is exactly what happened, and that chaos would allow the deep state to create a Gog and Magog war. So let's hear General Wesley Clark confirm that this was an actual plan that was actually in existence in late 2001. So let's listen to that.
He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. So I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda? He said, no. He says, there's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq to me.
Now, I think most of you would agree with me that this kind of plan to destroy the political leadership of 7 major Middle East countries is diabolical, and that this would be key evidence of a plan by the deep state, by these Satanists, by the Illuminati, whatever you want to call them, that would actually create chaos in the world. And so I think most of you would agree with me that that is actually a bad or evil thing. So that by implication would mean that any country that opposed that plan, that stopped that plan, by definition would be good. And that's very important, because keep that in mind, because that's going to become very critical very shortly, and I will explain. So let me go on to this Gog and Magog war. So what was it that the deep state was trying to create in terms of the destruction of 7 Middle East countries? What they were trying to do is to create a war, a Gog and Magog war, manufacturing World War III. In the book of Revelations, quote, "And when the 1,000 years are finished, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall come forth to deceive the nations which are in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to the war, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea." Now, if you look at that map, you can see that that map includes some prominent Middle East countries, as well as Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, and so forth, and Iran. Now, there's these other countries that were part, the 7 countries that would make up that General Wesley Clark described. They are part of these lands that historically belonged to Gog and Magog. So here you have a reference to these different areas, including Turkey, and how these countries would, in the end times, be part of an alliance that would wage war against Israel in the final days. So I think what we can see here in trying to undermine these 7 countries, these Middle East countries, that the deep state wanted to create the conditions for a Gog and Magog war, which would fulfill Revelations and create chaos in a key region of the world that would bring about the end times through some final cataclysmic war, like a regional war, like a World War III. So that was their plan. So I discussed that plan in one of my webinars at the end of 2023, the Deep State Plan for a Gog and Magog war. So I'll go into detail there. So for those of you that want to find out more, you can get it there. Now, the key obstacle to this plan was Russia's Putin. Vladimir Putin was the man leading the country that had the history, the culture, the weapons to withstand the deep state plan to create this Gog and Magog war. And that's very important, because I know there's a lot of people, and probably some of you watching this, that say, well, Russia's a fascist state and Putin is this monstrous dictator. And, I don't quibble with those that say Putin is a dictator and that he passes policies kind of like ruling out any kind of political dissidents and so forth. Yeah, that's what's going on. But that doesn't make him an evil person. It just makes him a classic kind of authoritarian leader. Just because you're an authoritarian leader doesn't make you an evil or bad person. I mean, there have been many authoritarian leaders that have been considered good historically. But the fact that Putin and Russia have stood up to this deep state plan, I think, is very, very important. For those that have difficulty accepting Putin is a good guy, don't accept that he's a good guy. Accept that he's an authoritarian leader that is acting for a good cause. And that good cause is to stop this deep state plan to bring about a Gog and Magog war that would destroy the Middle East and bring in the nuclear superpowers, Russia and the United States, and suck in China as well. And Putin was the main obstacle to this. And I think that makes Putin, in my mind, a good guy, or if not so much a good guy, a vehicle of divine purpose, a positive divine purpose. Now, some of you may have difficulty accepting that. It's a bridge too far, Michael, and so forth. Well, here's someone who agrees. Edgar Cayce had this prophecy about Russia, and he said, through Russia comes the hope of the world, not in respect to what is sometimes termed communism or Bolshevism, no, but freedom, that each man will live for his fellow man. The principle has been born there. It will take years for it to be crystallized, yet out of Russia comes again the hope of the world. Well, what did he mean by that? Freedom. I don't think he was talking about freedom in the sense of democracy, because democracy is a system of governance that can be easily manipulated, as we see in the United States. We have lobby groups that control the Congress, and the Congress acts for the interests of lobby groups rather than constituents. So he's not talking about freedom in the sense of democracy as we understand it. He was talking about freedom from the sons of Belial, that the sons of Belial was this satanic force that destroyed Atlantis, and that its modern incarnation is known by many names, whether you call it the Cabal, the Illuminati, the Deep State, the family, whatever you want to call it. He says that this organization is what suppresses human freedom. And if you destroy that organization, then you, by definition, free humanity. And that is exactly what Russia under Putin is doing. He is freeing humanity from the sons of Belial, who are today the deep state, the modern deep state, trying to create a Gog and Magog war in the Middle East that would basically bring about a third world war. And here's another psychic that had something to say about Vladimir Putin in this regard of him being a vehicle and Russia being a vehicle of kind of like divine, a positive divine purpose. The Bulgarian mystic Baba Vanga, she was blind, she predicted, quote, all will thaw as if ice, only one remain untouched, Vladimir's glory, the glory of Russia. Okay, so what does she mean there? Now, I think she's quite clearly alluding to Vladimir Putin, and he would be the only one remaining. The only one remaining from one. From what? The only one remaining from the onslaught of the deep state. In the United States, you did have a leader. There was a leader, and I know I'm going to upset a lot of people by saying this, but Donald Trump was someone that opposed the deep state, which is why the deep state has been trying desperately to get rid of him, and even now trying to stop him from winning the 2024 election. But I don't want to talk about Trump in this presentation, but I just want to point out that Trump was truly an obstacle to the deep state agenda, but he was effectively neutralized and removed from power. And I think that's what Baba Vanga means, that in the end of the day, the only world leader that would oppose the deep state or these satanic forces trying to bring about global destruction would be Russia and Vladimir Putin. Too much it is brought in a victim. Nobody can stop Russia. And she's absolutely right. I think what we are seeing today is that all the efforts to destroy, undermine Russia have failed. And I want to point out that Russia intervened in a critical time in April of this year. In April of this year, something happened that was very important. So just last month, we can look at the sunspot activity and the Iran-Israel conflict. So on April 1st, Israel attacks the Iranian embassy compound in Syria, in the capital, Damascus. So on April 1st, you can see here that the total number of sunspots was 32. Not that much by way of sunspot activity. But I think this was planned. Somehow, the deep state, using its Israeli asset, Benjamin Netanyahu, launched this attack knowing that Iran would respond, and that would set off a series of retaliatory actions that would then bring about this Gog and Magog war. I think that was the plan. And that they timed it to coincide with increased sunspot activity, which is known to be a time when humans are incredibly agitated, full of energy, and that war spirit is at its height. So is there evidence for this? Well, I think there is. April 14, Iran launches 300 plus missiles and drones at Israel. So on April 14, you can see here that there was 148 sunspots. Oh, sorry, that April 14, yeah. Was that April 14? I think it was April 14 or 13. Okay, so I don't quite. All right, let's, April 14, Iran retaliates, and there's 148 there's 148 sunspots on that day. So the sunspot activity is off the wall. I mean, that's very intense. So a lot of sunspot activity. So the magnetosphere of the Earth is bombarded with all this solar radiation, and humans are agitated and aggressive, and testosterone is flying. Like, if you want a war, this is the time. Let's rumble. April 14, let's rumble. Deep state planned it. Here we go. April 19, the Israelis launched their retaliation against Iran's retaliation. So the Israeli retaliation was on April 19. And look at the number of sunspots, 240. Off the wall. I mean, that is really, really high. And I'll show you a historical chart soon so you can see just how high this was. This was planned by the deep state. They planned this. They planned for Israel to attack Iran on April 1st, knowing that this was the most propitious time for an escalatory series of strikes to take place that would plunge the region into this end times Gog and Magog war. And here's a historical chart of sunspot numbers that shows. You can see going all the way back to the 1600s, the number of sunspots. And you can see that historically the peak is around 250. And you can see that the last time we had like 250 sunspots, that was around here, around 1950. Was the last time you had a peak of 250 sunspots. And then you had one going all the way back here, like in the late 1700s, another period of high sunspot activity. Now, high sunspot activity, as I've been saying, actually is the most propitious time to launch a war. And that's when traditionally countries go to war. So if you look at this chart, you can historically map major regional wars when sunspot numbers are very high. So there has been studies done on this. So here's a study that was, this discusses some studies about sunspots being connected with global recessions, war, or famine. Whether it's a high or a low, high you get war, lows you get recessions and famines. Some sunspot activities is understood to be critical in these global events and processes associated with recessions, war, and famine. So the first person to talk about this or kind of like point this out was this Russian researcher, Pyotr Sorokin, who was I don't know if he was a Russian researcher or an American with Russian heritage, but he was a Harvard sociologist, and he first proposed a link between sunspots and war in a 1938 paper in the American Sociological Review. Now, think about what I just said. So sunspot activity, high sunspot activity is conducive to launching major wars or for major wars to break out. And a major war was planned to break out in April of this year, just a few weeks ago. But it didn't. It didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? It didn't happen because Russia prevented it. Russia prevented the Iran-Israel war from escalating to this level where it would become a Gog and Magog war. So Vladimir Putin played the critical role in persuading Iran to retaliate in a non-escalatory way to avoid triggering a destructive regional war. So he explained to the Iranians what was going on. I think Putin was given good intelligence by his Psi-Corps of what the deep state plan was. So both the deep state and the White Hats, the Earth Alliance, used psychics. So Putin had his Psi-Corps brief him about what the plan of the deep state was. And so he did it. He intervened and he got the Iranians to limit their response to Israel's initial attack in a way where no one was killed. That was very important because the Israelis would then lack sufficient justification for launching an overwhelming strike targeting Iranian cities or military facilities, causing many fatalities, because the Russians had arranged with White Hats within the United States, because there are White Hats in the military in the United States, and Russia and the American White Hats, what we can call the Earth Alliance, made the arrangement and said, well, look, if the Iranians launch their strike, they can say what they want about it, but they don't kill any Israelis, then we can persuade the Israelis to stand down. And that's what happened. The Israelis then stood down. Well, didn't quite stand down. They did launch a retaliation, but their retaliation that happened when sunspot activity was at 240, designed to be a peak period, a time when there would be this overwhelming aggression and kind of testosterone, and that was when the war spirit was strongest, that the Israelis retaliated. But Putin got the Iranians to stand down. He said, look, the Israelis, they need to do this. They have retaliated, but you can just pretend that nothing happened, that it was like no big deal. You don't even have to say it was an Israeli strike. And that's what the Iranians did. So Putin played that key role in preventing the Iranians from retaliating to Israel's strike. And now here we are on May 4, and the sunspot activity is going down. So the threat of war has passed. So I think you can make a good case that Putin and Russia have fulfilled, certainly to a certain extent, fulfilled Edgar Cayce's prophecy of at least saving the world from a devastating Third World War. Now, as for freeing us from the sons of Belial, that's another matter. Now, I'm just looking at the time. It's 4:20. I have about another 15 slides to go. So I'll probably finish around 4:40. So I'll be another 15, 20 minutes in case anyone needs to have a quick break. All right, so let me go on. So now let's talk about Russia being part of this multinational alliance or Earth Alliance. And Russia was part of a mission to greet extraterrestrial visitors. This is based on information from one of my sources, JP, who's currently serving in the US Army. He's active duty. And he described in 2021 going on a mission that was multinational, that included Russia, to meet with an incoming group of extraterrestrial visitors that were arriving in motherships. He also described Russia and the US cooperating on space arks, that these ancient space arks that were found all over the Earth in subterranean locations, in underwater locations, off planet, on the moon and elsewhere, that there has been cooperation between the US and Russia on exploring and gaining possession of some of the advanced technologies on these space arks. So JP described a multinational mission that he was involved in that involved the US, Russia, and Chinese soldiers going to rescue a group, or actually I think it was 2 Aztec Indians that were left on a space ark submerged in the Atlantic Ocean. So that was his second mission to the Atlantic space ark, and it was a rescue mission. And that Russian soldiers were part of that. So there you have Russian, Americans, and Chinese collaborating in 2000, I think this was 2023 as I recall, collaborating on a rescue mission on this submerged space ark. So it just shows that, as I described, the Cold War had this veneer of overt hostilities between the major military blocs. And today we have the same thing. There seems to be overt hostility between military blocs. On the one hand, you have the United States and NATO. On the other hand, you have Russia, China, Iran, and the BRICS nations and so forth. And they appear at each other's throats, right? But underneath, you have cooperation. You have information sharing. You have joint teams to examine and find ancient technologies, because at the end of the day, it's really the deep state which is manufacturing all these surface conflicts, but that the Earth Alliance are creating the conditions for cooperation at the deeper levels. So that's what we see here with these Atlantic space ark rescue missions. Now there's the conflict over the Ukrainian space ark. Now JP and Elena Danaan, the Galactic Federation of Worlds, describe that a large space ark was buried in Ukraine's Kherson Oblast and under Oleshki Sands National Park. So you can see here, this is Oleshki Sands National Park. So it's this kind of like circular looking natural sandy desert in an otherwise fertile Ukraine with all of this rich black soil. And underneath that apparently lies a space ark which is emitting some kind of radiation which prevents plant life from growing there. And here you and the information I got from JP was that this buried space ark activated when the extraterrestrial motherships arrived in our solar system. So the space arks all over the Earth began activating because they are connected to this incoming fleet of motherships. And as they activated, then there was a competition between the deep state and the Earth Alliance and Russia over who would get control of this space ark. And it's very interesting that you have the special military operation launched by Russia, which ostensibly was to free the Donbass region, which is kind of like over here in the Ukrainian map. So why in the world would Russia launch a military incursion from Crimea into the southern area of Ukraine, which has nothing to do with the Donbass region? So one explanation is that they did this because there's a buried space ark there in Kherson Oblast, and that the deep state was wanting to had found it once it activated, and it was going to exploit it for whatever purposes. And the Russians and the Earth Alliance decided that no, we can't allow this. So is there confirmation for this? Well, here you have Thorhan Eredyan, whose information was relayed through Elena Danaan, and what he said was very revealing. He said the deep state, well, quote, the deep state was attempting to activate the ark, which they had found many years ago, buried underneath the sand in the lower southern part of Ukraine. The ark activated, so it was time Putin got his hands on it. So there you have this friendly group of extraterrestrial visitors saying that this space ark had been discovered years ago and the deep state was in control of it, but once it's activated and it became possible for its technologies to be used, that it was time for Putin to get his hands on it. And he went on, Thorhan went on to say that, quote, Putin has his hands on the other ark in the north of Russia, and he has been taught by positive extraterrestrials how to use this technology. So Thorhan is saying that Putin is working with positive extraterrestrials in utilizing these space ark technologies for a positive purpose. And what is that positive purpose? Stopping the deep state, preventing the sons of Belial from creating a global catastrophe again that brought about the destruction of Atlantis, that the deep state wants to create now to bring about the destruction of Western civilization and even something much worse. Now, this other possible ark in Russia, now one possibility is this Potomsky crater, which is in southeast Siberia. So there you have this very unusual object. I mean, a crater with a dome in the middle of that. What would cause that? So according to Anton Anfilov, he thinks that this might be another space ark. So this could be the second space ark in Russia that Thorhan was referring to, or it could be something else. So the deep state and Russia battle over the Ukraine space ark. So this is very interesting. Thorhan went on to say, quote, this ark in North Russia is secured and in good hands, contrarily to the Ukrainian ark, which through to this day is in the hands of the Earth Alliance. It is still fought for by the deep state military base in the south of Ukraine, near the ark buried in the sand. So this gives us an important context for understanding this Ukrainian conflict, that it truly is that the Ukrainian side is an asset of the deep state, that the deep state is pouring arms, is pouring finances, personnel into Ukraine to perpetuate a war that was really from the beginning, as many experts have noted, unnecessary. That this was always a clear political conflict in the Donbass, and that could have easily been resolved. But the deep state wanted to create a larger war that would suck in Russia and would actually lead to the collapse of Russia. But the deep state didn't anticipate that Russia would come through it, not weakened, but actually stronger. So this is what, and so you can see the similarities here between the Oleshki Sands Nature Park and what was found in this Siberian crater. Okay, so Russia and the Jupiter Accords. So what do we make of these agreements that occurred in 2021 near Jupiter? Now, this information comes from Elena Dinar, and she provided a very interesting flowchart of the Jupiter Accords. She said that there were 14 countries in attendance. There were also major corporations involved, SpaceX, Blue Origins, and Bigelow Aerospace, and so forth, as well as the major Lockheed Martin and so forth, Northrop Grumman, all of those kind of traditional legacy corporations. So 14 countries, along with aerospace companies, attended these meetings, and that they were subjected to 12 independent meetings with representatives of the Galactic Federation and other extraterrestrials. And that, according to the information Elena got, there was a sequence of meetings that led to 6 major spacefaring countries being the ones that were the true space explorers, as opposed to other smaller countries with kind of small space agencies that are really in it for trade and maybe some exploration. But these are the 6 major countries that are truly committed to space exploration and have traditionally been involved for decades in rocket programs, satellite programs, and space exploration. So, and she says out of the original 14 countries, a committee of 6, a smaller group of 6 were chosen. Those 6 countries, I believe, included the 5 permanent members of this UN Security Council. That is Russia, China, the US, the United Kingdom, and France. And that the 6th one would have been Japan. And then there was a smaller meeting involving 4 countries in terms of which of these 4 countries was going to lead the Earth in terms of negotiations with extraterrestrials. So there were 4 countries, and she identified Russia, China, and the US. And the 4th country wasn't identified. We suspect that it was France. And finally, the US was chosen. So there's an executive committee with 6 countries, I've already mentioned, and that each of these countries have a vested interest in space because they've been involved in space exploration for decades. And in terms of satellite launches, we can see that the oldest spacefaring nation was Russia, 1957. It launched Sputnik. Then you had United States in 1958, France 1962, Britain 1962, China 1970, and Japan also in 1970. These are the countries, the 6 countries that make up this executive committee, according to the information from Elena Danan. So what does the future hold now? Okay, so we are at a critical phase, I think. The deep state plan to conjure up a Gog and Magog war, I think, is done. They had their chance. It was eliminated, and that the key country that did that was Russia. So what does the future hold? So I think we can, to get an idea, we can look at this 2019 document called The Future of Space 2060, an implication for US strategy. That was a report by the Space Futures Workshop that was organized by the US Air Force Space Command. It identified 8 plausible space scenarios by 2060. And it strategizes what would be the most optimistic future for humanity in space. Now, this was all set up by the US Air Force Space Command that was renamed or reconstituted as the United States Space Force in, I think that was December of 2019. So 8 future scenarios. The optimal scenario is a Star Trek future with US leadership. That's the optimal scenario. The least desirable scenario is Xi's dream, and that's a China-centric space future, one where China dominates Earth's relations with space, or the Earth presence in space is dominated by Chinese values and agendas. So the optimal scenario for Space Force, and of course the US, and is the Star Trek future. Now, China and Russia have, at the moment, developed their own international space initiative. It's called the International Lunar Research Station, and that was launched in St. Petersburg in 2021 by China and Russia. 8 more nations have since joined, and they are kind of minor space powers: Azerbaijan, Belarus, Egypt, Pakistan, Russia, South Africa, Thailand, and Venezuela. So apart from Russia and China, all of those other countries have very small space programs. So, but nevertheless, what China is doing is building an international alliance because it wants to strengthen its case that it is destined to become the dominant Earth space power in the future, and that extraterrestrials should take into account Chinese values and agendas. I think that's the transparent goal that they have. In contrast, you have the Artemis Accords that were put together in the Trump administration, and currently that has 39 signatory nations, and these include the major spacefaring countries. So all of the major spacefaring countries, the United States, Britain, France, Italy, Germany, India, Brazil, they all are members of the Artemis Accords. Japan as well, all members. But nevertheless, there's going to be this rivalry between the US and China-led space alliances, and that's going to continue to grow. And Russia is the wild card, because even though on the surface you have this tension between the United States, NATO, and Russia over Ukraine and the Middle East and so forth, beneath the scene, there's a lot of cooperation. So Russia is the wild card, and I think everyone knows this. And so what is going to happen? I suspect at some point Russia will, after there's been a kind of, after this Ukraine conflict is over and the kind of like tempers have cooled a little bit, then Russia will realign itself. So, once the truth is known about Russia's role in defeating the deep state, world opinion will turn. So I think that's very important. Whether you agree or disagree about Russia being an authoritarian state led by a dictator-like figure like Vladimir Putin, even if that is correct for some people, okay, if you want to argue that, fair enough. That doesn't mean that Russia did not play this very important, divinely inspired role in taking down the deep state plan to create a global Gog and Magog war, a third world war that would lead to utter ruination of the planet. And because of Russia's actions, the deep state is done. It's going to be exposed, and it's on the way out, because in terms of sunspot activity, astrological configurations, the deep state doesn't have a future. It's going to be exposed. And the Trump administration is coming in. Trump will be returning. I mean, anyone that doubts that, just look at the news. This Biden administration is losing legitimacy by the day. The Trump administration will come back, and Donald Trump will significantly improve relations with Russia. A Putin-Trump Earth alliance will be the death knell of the deep state. The deep state knows this, which is why the deep state, when Trump became president or was elected the president in 2016, did everything they could to make it impossible for Russia and the United States to collaborate, because the deep state knows that once you had Russia and the United States collaborating, both being led by these leaders, Trump and Putin, that the deep state's days would be numbered. And that I think this Trump-Putin future, this Earth alliance that they are involved in is going to be the death knell of the deep state, and that's going to create world peace. And world peace is important, because I think without global peace, you can't have the kind of disclosures that many of us want. We want genuine disclosure, but the positive extraterrestrials have been holding back because they wanted to see if we could succeed in vanquishing the deep state. And it's happened. It has happened. So this is tremendously good news. The deep state is done, and this Earth Alliance is victorious, and that's going to become clearer and clearer as 2024 plays out, and we're going to have big disclosures, UFO, NET disclosures. So in a way, I kind of preempted all of this in my 2021 webinar, The Earth Alliance, Full Disclosure and the Coming Global Revolution, where I talk about this collaboration between these four leaders, even though, as I said, even though you can describe each one as authoritarian and you dislike them greatly, fair enough, I understand that, each one is playing a critical role in undermining this vicious, satanic deep state that has been pulling the strings behind the scenes for centuries, if not millennia, and that Edgar Casey is right, that the defeat of the deep state spells freedom for our planet. So that's it for my webinar. Thank you. I definitely went a little overboard. I apologize for that, but I want to thank you all for being here, for sharing this kind of stage with me. I mean, I couldn't do these webinars without you, without the audience being here and supporting me in my research. I want to thank my wonderful wife, Angelica, for looking after the video switching and handling the questions and supporting my webinars in many other ways. Thank you, sweetheart. I mean, I couldn't do it without you. I want to thank Jazz Marlin for doing the trailer for the webinar, helping us with the technical aspects of this webinar. Thanks also to Anton Anfilov for sharing with me your tremendous knowledge of the Soviet and Russian secret space programs and being very active in the chat in sharing your wisdom. So thank you all and aloha.